Hello, welcome back to Desperate Living. Today we're going to take a look at another new release, and surprise surprise, another new release that I've actually had some personal involvement with, but one that I'm very pleased to be involved in and heartily recommend to all of you. It's this. Our World is Drowning and Going to Hell, the underground films of Richard Baylor. This is a forthcoming release, as I record this, from Saturn's Core, a label that we will be discussing, I imagine, on more than one future occasion, and consists of 8 underground movies that were originally released over 3 VHS tapes in the early 1990s by the American-born, British-based filmmaker Richard Baylor, as you probably guessed from the fact that it's called the Underground Films of Richard Baylor. Now, Richard was somebody who I knew quite well back in the early 1990s when he was releasing these films. I was publishing Divinity magazine at that point, and so we had mutual interests, shall we say, in terms of culture and art. Divinity was one of the leading titles of the so-called transgressive culture of that era, and Richard was very much inspired by the cinema of transgression, filmmakers like Dick Zed, Richard Kern, Cassandra Stark, and others. Obviously, people like Lydia Lunch were involved in as well, and so his work very much reflects that style, that aesthetic. I mean, Richard was not necessarily part of the cinema of transgression, which felt like a very kind of US-centric, New York-centric even, movement. But in another way, he was part of it, not just because he was actually distributing the films of Nick Zed and Richard Kern in the UK. I think the statute of limitations is up on that, and we can talk about that now. But also, of course, his films were spiritually part of that movement, even if he was doing it from a completely different country, and from Ipswich in the UK of all places, not somewhere that you would necessarily think of as the hub of transgressive culture. So let's have a quick look at this new disc. This is the slipcased edition, which is the one to buy, I imagine, and it's only available through the Saturn's Core website, so I'll point you towards that. It's already half sold out at the time of filming, so chop chop, get a move on. And here's what I assume will be the cover of the regular disc inside, which, as you can see, comes with, it's not a double-sided sleeve, it's a, well, it is a double-sided sleeve, but it's not different covers. It's one front cover and then imagery on the inside, which is pretty cool stuff. Stills from the movies, and then there is this booklet. This is really nicely produced and substantial booklet. It opens up with my own essay about Richard it's based on something that I originally wrote several years ago for Desperate Living, the Reprobate as it was at the time, where I was essentially bemoaning the fact that Richard and his films had been lost, disappeared, it seemed, and there was no way of tracking him or them down. So I'm very glad to have been able to update that and correct it to go in this collection. There's also text by Heather Drain, the cult film journalist, Ross Snyder, who is the man responsible for rediscovering and re-releasing these films. God bless him. Vincent Halberano, who is the author of, let me just check the title, it's quite long, Aesthetic Deviations, A Critical View of American SOV Horror 1984 to 1994, which in itself sounds like something we should be investigating further. And finally, there's a vintage interview with Richard by Hugh Gallagher of Draculina magazine from 1992, when his work was probably at its peak. So Richard released 3 films, or 3 collections of films, more accurately, on VHS in the early 1990s. There was You Made Your Bed, Now Die in It in 1991, which featured the films Thoughts from the White Walls, Dum Dum, and Good Things Happen to Those Who Love the Lord. He followed that a year later with The Holy Trinity, which features Dead Love, Jesus Hates You, and My Funny Valentine. And then his magnum opus, I would argue, Cursium Delectus in 1993, single film. It's around 45 minutes long. Basically, it's like a calling card for a feature film. It's based on Douglas Clark and Carol Bundy, the Sunset Strip killers, and he transposes that to a kind of British post-industrial wasteland. It's a great movie, and I think everybody thought at the time that Richard would be going on to bigger and better things. You know, the feature film was just around the corner. Instead, everything stopped at that point. Now, Richard, together with a lot of the other people on the underground transgressive culture scene of the 1990s, is somebody who I personally lost touch with around 1994, 95. I was having a few legal issues relating to my own magazine, Divinity, and also some personal issues that just became a distraction, and I sort of packed everything in and lost touch with a lot of people, many of whom never been able to track down again since, notably Damon Bower and Marianne Farrell, who worked under the Image 37 name and were contemporaries of Richard, making very different kinds of movies, but you know, they knew each other, they were friends, and I'd shown movies by all of them at various events. So if by chance they pick up on this, if they watch this, if they pick up on this release, please get in touch, let me know what you're doing, let's talk about your movies. I think there's a market out there for them. But let's get back to Richard. Why he stopped making films after Cursium Delectus is something that you probably need to watch the accompanying documentary for. I'm not going to run into spoilers here, but you know, his reasons were sound, and you know, we can't really argue with that. I doubt he has any major regrets. I'm sure we all have some. I think those of us who loved his work probably have regrets that we didn't get to see more of it, but you know, that's just the way things work out, unfortunately. So a few things to say about this new edition. I suppose the most important thing for those of you who are a bit fixated on quality, those of you who now consider DVD to be unwatchable because we have Blu-ray and are probably on the verge of deciding that Blu-ray is unwatchable because we have UHD, then this might not be for you. Richard's films were shot on VHS, not even on kind of mini DV or not high 8. They were filmed and edited on VHS. This was real guerrilla filmmaking using the kind of materials and the kind of equipment that was around and affordable at that time. So clearly, there's only so much you can do with VHS. Believe me, I know. I've tried, and although these look as great as you could ever hope for them to look, they are going to look like something that was made on VHS. That shouldn't be a deal breaker for you unless you're somebody who is just completely more interested in the format than the content. I think it gives these movies a certain kind of, dare we say, retro authenticity. You know, they are products of their time, and they're going to look like products of their time, and not just in terms of the way people were dressed. I mean, clearly this is all kind of a kind of post-goth industrial grunge, whatever kind of culture you want to put to it, but you know, it's very much a kind of rock and roll youth culture of the early 1990s. And Richard was obviously working with band members, both recording the soundtracks and shooting video stuff, bands like White Slug and Extreme Noise Terror. So, you know, he was very much a part of that scene. In fact, also on this disc, alongside all the other content, a few of Richard's music videos, which, you know, are well worth checking out. So again, this is of its time, it's of its place, it's of its culture. It's a time and a place and a culture that I very much grew up in and still love very much. I'm not one of those people who has become a kind of revisionist rejecter of 90s nihilism. I think 90s nihilism has quite a lot going for it, quite frankly. And so I very much recommend picking this up. Obviously, you probably want to pick up the slipcase edition, as I said, because why the hell not? Interestingly, this is the original cover art for Cursium Delectus. This is the cover art for You Made Your Bed, Now Die in It, both of which I still have on tape, though I'm not entirely sure just where they are at the moment. I do, however, have the VHS of the Holy Trinity here. That's the original version, which, as you can see, even had a little booklet with it, which is quite a nice little thing. Actually, I'm not sure this did come with it. I don't know what it's doing in there, because yes, it's talking about yeah, it does actually discuss Cursium Delectus in here. So maybe this was a promo booklet that came out at a later point, and it just ended up in here as for safekeeping, I suppose. As you can see, I mean, this is all very handmade stuff. Handwritten labels, photocopy cover. Interestingly enough, one story that I do tell on the commentary tracks that I've done for these films, which I will share here, is the story of a young woman who became very irate seeing me selling a copy of this on a stall at Torture Garden, the famous London fetish club, because she considered the title blasphemous, the Holy Trinity. And the fact that she was at a fetish club dressed in a relatively small amount of clothing didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. It's like, surely your God would object to that too. But I guess, you know, you can never really shake religion entirely. You just learn to deal with it, and I think Richard deals with religion in his own movies very well. I mean, a lot of these films do have a lot of religious imagery, a lot of very contentious, difficult, challenging imagery in there. It has to be said, some of it bordering on what we would call blasphemous. You know, he actually shot some stuff in a local church, which is quite entertaining. But beyond that, the movies are dealing with issues of you know, social isolation, mental breakdown, collapsing relationships, violence, sex. The kind of thing that you often found in the cinema of transgression. And, you know, for those of you who are fans of those movies, if you're fans of Nick Zed, Richard Kern, then, you know, you will definitely find a lot to enjoy in Richard's work as well. I hope that those of you who are adventurous enough and open-minded enough to pick this up will enjoy it in the same way, and also just get a feel for what was happening in Britain in the transgressive underground in the early 1990s, a time of great creative invention. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these studies of new releases, studies of old releases, video essays, everything else, then don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Also check out our new sister channel, The Overlooked Hotel, which we'll link to down below, where we discuss lost histories, forgotten stories, and general overlooked weirdness from the past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon. by Ross Snyder, who put this collection together. Hi, what are you doing? Again? What? You want to be the video star? Hi, why don't you go and sit over here? Good girl. No? What do you want? I know. Good girl. Yes. Oh. Monkey. Yes, I know. I know.